is really true that I chose law. I think law chose me. When I was very young, I delighted in argument, and exasperated relatives would say, "You better become a lawyer, buzz off." And then after the war, I nearly gave it up. It took about a month to decide whether I really would do law or not, and finally decided that I would. You might like to know what I was thinking of doing instead. Answer, forestry.
Forestry?
Yeah.
This is a far cry from law indeed. This is a very far cry from law. Why forestry?
Yes, you see, but then I've always had a hankering for country life and wild places and being on your own. And the other side of me was interested in just an argument.
And the argument won over everything else. The argument won over everything else.
For the mere.
What is the true story of your enlistment in the British Army, Mr. Manley? Is it true that you were refused the commission at one stage?
No. There is no truth in that at all. I joined the army as a gunner in an East London regiment, and I refused many offers of a commission because I liked where I was. It was a very interesting group of men. Londoners, Covent Garden market porters. My sergeant was a Covent Garden market porter. Dublin University men, Yorkshire miners. They were a lively, interesting lot. Once, in a moment of weakness, I was persuaded by an officer to apply for a commission in the BWI, but that didn't last very long, for reasons which I would rather not enter into. I withdrew the application.
As coming back to law, Mr. Manley, as a young barrister in Jamaica prior to 1938, what do you best remember about your growing career?
What I best remember was the state of my fee book at the end of 1 month, when I hadn't got enough money to pay my grocer's bill, and I had to provide for a wife and a baby. I remember exactly and precisely what I earned the first month. It was £16, 16 shillings.
That must have been very early in your career, Mr. Manley, because your career grew very fast, didn't it?
That was my very first month.
Didn't happen again that way, though, did it?
No.
Would you like to tell me some of your highlights of your career? What was the case you enjoyed most and why?
No, because I'd have to write a book. I enjoyed such a large number of cases. I couldn't possibly tell you what were the most interesting ones.
Is there nothing at all in your career as a barrister that you would like to record that sticks out in your mind?
Hard work. 7 days a week, 16 to 18 hours a day. That's what sticks out in my mind.
Well, would you attribute your success as a barrister to pure research, or was it your flair for courtroom work, or was it a combination of both?
It was hard work, first of all. It was absolutely egotistic determination to win every case I was engaged in, which I regard as the most important attribute of an advocate. A famous judge was once asked by a fond father, "What advice would you give me to give my son now that he proposes to go in for the bar?" And he replied, "Sir, remind the young man that he must have high animal spirits. That is the first requirement. And the second is the same, and the third is the same. And if in addition the young gentleman will learn a little law, he won't do too badly.
In other words, just a capacity for hard work, unremitting,
and a total will to win, so that you stopped at nothing. It gave you maximum concentration, maximum personal observation, maximum study, maximum everything. And the reward was winning.
Let us move on a little bit, Mr. Manley, to that
In that regard, law is very like politics, you know. If you're not a good egotist, keep out of both.
Let us move on a bit now to, again, 1938, and your impression of the state of Jamaica prior to 1938. Did this explosion in 1938 come suddenly, or was it building up? Were you aware of it in those days?
All sensitive, thoughtful people were aware that it was building up and wondering what on earth we were to do. If you go back as far as 1935, you'll find that there were a number of labor disturbances in 1935 involving resort to violence and things that resemble riots. You'll find that there was constant talk about unemployment and what are we to do to find life and work for the people. That continued through 1936 and 37, getting steadily worse and worse. And indeed, in 1935, an unemployment commission was set up. It came up with a whole lot of recommendations and reasons and all sorts of things. Between that time and 1938, there's an enormous amount of talk about land settlement as one of the means of relieving unemployment and providing work for people. But the whole thing was there boiling up, and the influence upon what happened in Jamaica of what happened in the other islands, Trinidad, Barbados, British Guiana, all those things had some subtle influence on what happened. It should not surprise anybody that 1938 happened. What should surprise everybody is the way in which it happened. And what will surprise the historian was the way in which it was resolved.
You mentioned the movement in the other Caribbean islands. But in those days, Mr. Manley, communication between the islands was not very well developed, was it? Do you think that, in fact, there was any communication going on at all between leaders in the different islands?
Well, you see, the truth is that all these movements were largely without leadership. They were spontaneous uprisings. Rome didn't occur because of leadership. Rome occurred because of the lack of leadership. In 1930, an explosion in Kingston, which spread all over Jamaica. I took the trouble to make a particular study of the matter. I had some of the best undercover agents I could find in Jamaica travel through the island to find out, is this thing being inspired? Is it being led? How does it happen? And all the evidence was that it happened spontaneously. And that's why it just spread like a prairie fire from one end of Jamaica to the other.
Speaking some more about 1938, Mr. Manley, would you like to tell us what you consider some of the most important events in 1938?
The most important event was the thing that started it all. When the waterfront went out on strike, the police interfered in a tactless way. Bustamante intervened in a tactful way from his point of view, and that set off a chain reaction, exactly like an atomic bomb. It spread in 4 hours, it spread into every corner of Kingston and St. Andrew. Every single institution went on strike. Every factory, every enterprise. Shops were closed, tram cars stopped running. In thousands of cases, domestic servants stopped cleaning the pots and pans and said, I've gone on strike too. The second most important event, and I'm talking now of the events which built up the year into what it subsequently became, was the fact that the government, in a panic, on the second day, arrested Bustamante, and partly because I saw the masses without leadership, and partly because I had my own ideas as to what should be done, I intervened that night by offering myself as a representative of all striking groups anywhere in Jamaica. Following on that, and on the same day that that was announced, I persuaded the governor to set up a commission to inquire into all grievances by all groups on strike and to recommend how the grievances should be dealt with, and to try and negotiate wages for everybody, new wage conditions. It was a sort of universal, all-Jamaican arbitration tribunal. And the third most important thing was that soon after that tribunal got to work, I succeeded in getting Bustamante released by myself going into court and giving evidence in his favor. And consequent on all those things, we were able, Bustamante and I, to work together with that commission from one end of Jamaica to the other, pacifying striking groups, representing striking groups, acting in every way possible to bring something positively good out of the chaos that prevailed. And it can be said that at the end of 3 months, the average wages for all Jamaica had been increased 20%. And I think it must be almost unique in history that an event of that sort has resulted in positive good for the masses, except on a long-range point of view.
Would you like to tell me, Mr. Manley, a few more details about the part you played in having Sir Alexander released?
Well, when I was negotiating for the waterfront workers, there came a day, they made it quite clear that they felt that Buster should be released before they would accept any settlement. And I told them that I agreed with them, because I thought his arrest in the circumstances was entirely unjustified. And they showed extraordinary loyalty. And they kept on saying that it wasn't he that told them to strike, but they struck for themselves. And the government had no right to do what they're doing. Well, 3 applications were made for bail and refused. I think largely on the direction of government, who were terrified as to what would happen if he was let out. And a time came when we succeeded in getting everything that the waterfront workers wanted as a condition of their returning to work. And I was asked by the commission if it wouldn't be a good thing to announce it. And to that I replied, no, not at all. The workers are not going to accept it because Bustamante is still locked up. I told the commission that I had been asking the governor for 3 days, twice a day, to let him out, and warning him that we'd been for bad trouble. And on the final day, the final Friday, I attended at King's House with the whole of the commission, and all the top-ranking civil servants, and told them quite frankly that I would wash my hands of all responsibility for Kingston if they did not let Bustamante out, and that in my judgment it was likely that the town would be burned down on Sunday. And upon that, the governor asked me if I would give an assurance that all would be well if Bustamante was released. And after pointing out that it was hardly fair to me to ask a man with my reputation to guarantee the safety of the city if Buster was let out, I was requested to go and see him, and I did. I saw him at 10 o'clock in the general penitentiary, and after seeing him, we agreed on what was needed to restore peace, and I prevailed upon his lawyers. I actually took Smith out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning to renew an application before a High Court judge for bail, on the understanding that I would appear and give evidence that in my judgment the safety of Kingston would be enhanced and in no way hurt by the release of Bustamante on bail. And I had an assurance from the governor that he would direct the judge. These things are not supposed to happen, but life is life. That he would direct the judge that Bustamante was to get bail if I gave that evidence. And I gave that evidence, and he got bail. And I went to the prison myself to escort him out and to take him before the commission.
After 1938, Mr. Manley, would you like to give us some of the growth of your party and the idea of self-government? How did this all evolve, that sort of thing?
The party always started on a platform of constitutional reform. The birth of the party, I won't say the birth of the party, but how would you put it? The genesis, the germination, the insemination of the party occurred when, giving one of my daily press releases, I said the time has come to realize that we must have organized politics in Jamaica based upon adult suffrage, or otherwise the common people will have no representation, and this sort of thing will happen again. What Jamaica wants is a Labour Party, a real party. And then it all began. But from the start, we advocated two things: constitutional reform and adult suffrage, votes for everybody. And then the war broke out. In 1939, was it? Yeah. And we were faced with the problem of whether to carry on the constitutional agitation, which had then developed by 1939 into a flat demand for full self-government. And after a tentative decision to call it off during the war, it was finally decided, I think about the end of 1939, to resume and continue at all costs the agitation for self-government. By that time, I had come to this conclusion, that in this business somebody had to take the lead, as in most affairs. And that was either from my group to ask for limited reforms, that we should nail our flag to the mast of complete, full self-government in the sense of independence, and fight for that. And I coined the definition that in those days you were constantly being asked, is Jamaica fit for self-government? And I coined this test, which fitted in with the work we were doing, as to whether you are fit for self-government. That the only test of a people's fitness for self-government is their capacity to make effective demand for it. That covered what we were doing, and that proved absolutely correct in the final analysis.
Who were the people who influenced you most in your early years?
The two people who influenced me most, and probably most in my life, were my old headmaster, Archdeacon Sims, who was a most remarkable man and must have had a tremendous influence on a lot of the boys that passed under him. Remarkable because he was a perfectionist, remarkable because he was an encyclopedic, remarkable for his austerity, and remarkable for a peculiar habit he had of interfering as little as possible with the relationship between junior masters and boys. And where a master reported you to him, for that was the principle in which they were, for serious offenses, a master had to report you to him. And you denied what was charged, he always accepted your word. And the inference of the fact that it didn't matter what you said to him, he would say, well, it's hard to believe, but if you say so, I believe you, go. It had a fantastic influence on boys. The other man that I suppose I owe everything to was Reggie Murray, who afterwards became headmaster. Because up to the age of 16, I did no work at all in school. Practically no work. I was a mob leader. And Murray took charge of me at age 16 at my mother's request. And got me to learn in 1 year what should have ordinarily taken me 3. Whatever I became, I owe to Murray.
Would you trace for us, Mr. Manley, the relationship between Sir Alexander Bustamante and yourself?
Well, as you know, Bustamante is my half-first cousin. My grandmother on the maternal side, my mother's mother, first married a man called Clark. Clark was a junior overseer on properties in Hanover. And she had one son by that marriage, a man called Clark. Clark married twice. By his first wife, he had 2 girl children, whom I knew very well, both of whom became matrons of the Burley home on East Street. And by the second wife, he had about 6 or 7 children, of whom Bustamante was one. When I came back to Jamaica in 1922, I lived in the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital up on Hope Road. What's it called?
Andrews Memorial.
Andrews Memorial, yeah. I had 2 rooms up there. And I was sitting there with my wife one afternoon when who should come in but Alexander Clark, fresh from Cuba. It's such a Cuban dandy. You never saw anything like it in your life. Flawlessly dressed, handkerchief matched his tie, matched his socks. Hair was pomaded. He was the Spanish grandee to the life.
How did and when did you first meet Mrs. Manley?
I met Mrs. Manley in 1914 in England when she was a little girl of 14 years old. And then I didn't see her again until 1918. And then only for a day or 2. And then I saw a lot of her after 1919.
Mrs. Manley, we know, is a famous artist. Were you yourself very interested in art?
I was tremendously interested in books, in music, in theater, but I was comparatively ignorant about the plastic arts until I met her. But she was just dedicated to that. And in fact, I think what created this special interest, the first special interest in me, was that she was a total rebel herself. She ran away from home rather than take up an ordinary career as an art teacher, and insisted that she was going to become an artist in her own right. And she had a very, very hard time for nearly 2 years. I often went to see her and found that she hadn't had a square meal for a week.
record, Mr. Manley, is there anything you'd like to say?
For the record, I have only to say that when I retire from politics, which may not be too far away, I am going to write my political memoirs. And I think it is an important last job, because I know an enormous amount of things that will be lost forever to history if I don't record them. I know an enormous amount of why certain things happened and how they happened and what actually took place, which I think I should record. You won't find them in newspapers. You won't find them in the remarkable computer cards which are being assembled at the Institute of Jamaica. And I have stuck up in my library where I propose to write the book. I've already started work on it. I have stuck up a moral or a motto, a biblical quotation. The days of our years are 80 years and 10. Which is a reminder to me that I don't have much time left.